What's up guys, my name is Tony, and today I'm going to give you a quick and painless guide on installing NixOS. NixOS is really the end game of Linux in many respects, especially if you are someone who wants to install Linux on multiple systems or simply wants a very stable system that allows for rollbacks using a declarative config file for the packages. This is going to be part one of a deep dive on NixOS in general, because once you go down this rabbit hole, there's really no coming back. At the end of this guide, you will no longer be allergic to config files, and you'll be ready to install NixOS on your own hardware. So let's head over to nixos.org and click the download button here, and we'll scroll down to NixOS, the Linux distribution, so we can download the ISO. Now there are graphical ISO images here that have a Calamari install wizard, which do offer some convenience, but honestly these installers take longer for me than the minimal ISO installer, because we're not even going to be using a desktop environment anyway, and installing NixOS from the terminal is like 15 shell commands. So let's grab this minimal ISO and get to work. Alright, once we have our ISO loaded up and we see this grub screen, let's go ahead and just hit enter or let this automatically start to launch our NixOS installer. So there is an installation manual here which we will be partially following and partially not following. It will be useful for you guys to have, so I will drop a link to it in the description. And we're going to immediately scroll down to the manual installation section. So we are logged into our NixOS user here, and we're going to be running a lot of commands as root today, so let's immediately just switch users into root. So let's go ahead and type sudo-i. And there we go. So we can go ahead and clear the terminal with clear, or again, if you've watched some previous videos, you know we can use Control-L for that. So there we are. So the very first thing we're going to do is do a sanity check and make sure we have internet access. So let's go ahead and type ping mynixos.com, and there we go. We're going to quit that command with Control-C, and our internet connection is confirmed. Alright, we need to format our partitions here, and the manual recommends using parted, but again, if you've seen any of my videos in the past, you know I'm a big fan of cfdisk, so let's use that instead. So let's type lsblk to verify the name of our drive, and ours is SDA, so we can go ahead and type cfdisk/dev/sda. And we're going to go ahead and select GPT since we are on a UEFI system. And for the first partition, we're just going to hit enter here. We're going to type 1G and hit enter for our boot partition. And we need to change the type by using the arrow key to navigate to type here and hit enter. And we're going to go up to EFI system and hit enter. Alright, for the next partition, just hit down and hit enter on new. And we're going to type 4G so we can create our 4GB swap partition. And for the type, we're going to go ahead and select a Linux swap. And for our last partition, we could just hit down here and enter twice to automatically allocate the remainder of the space for our root partition. And we don't need to change the type because it is a Linux file system. Alright, that looks good to go, so let's navigate over to write. Hit enter, type yes, hit enter, and over to quit, and hit enter, and clear that. And let's confirm what we just did with lsblk, and there we go. Alright, let's go ahead and make those file systems. So over at the manual here, it recommends making our file systems with the correct labels, and we can go ahead and do that. So let's type mkfs.ext4-L NixOS dev SDA3. And for our swap, let's type mkswap-L swap dev SDA2. For our boot partition, let's do mkfs.fat-f32-n boot/dev/sda1. And we can ignore that warning there because the label is going to work on our system. Alright, let's mount these drives. Let's type mount dev sda3/mnt. And for our boot partition, let's go ahead and do mount --mkdir to make the directory dev sda1. And we're going to mount that to mnt/boot. And lastly, the swap partition, let's just turn that on by typing swap on/dev sda2. And we do need to mount our EFI vars here, otherwise NixOS will have trouble pointing systemd to the EFI vars. So let's do that by typing mount-t EFI varfs EFI varfs /sys/firmware/EFI/EFI vars. Lock that in. Alright, just a quick recap. Let's type lsblk, make sure we're looking good, and there we go. We've got our boot, we've got our root, and we've got our swap partitions, and they're mounted correctly. Move on to the next step. Yeah, we're almost installed here, guys. Normally on Arch or Gen 2, we're only about 10% of the way done here, but this is, I'd say, about 80% done. So next thing we need to do is generate the NixOS config, and we can do that with this command here. So let's go ahead and run nixos-generate-config-root/mnt. Perfect. I'm going to be using Vim a lot today for this video, and because this video's scope is mainly going to be focused on NixOS and what it has to offer, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I normally do with the Vim keybinds. So if you aren't comfortable in Vim, you can substitute it with Nano for now, and once we get NixOS installed, you can just use a GUI text editor like gedit, Kate, or what have you. The beauty of NixOS is that the entire system is blueprinted with a config file, and because of that, we can optimize our system and reproduce it on other machines just by modifying this config file. With proper version control, this really is the endgame of reproducibility, but it also is sort of the final boss of stability in many respects, and we'll get into more on why that is the case later. But once I start editing this config file, you're going to start to notice a theme here. So for now, let's jump into our config file by typing vim/mnt etc nixos configuration.nix. Beautiful. So if you just scroll up and down this file, you can sort of see what I'm talking about here. We have bootloader services, we have networking services, we've got time zone stuff, we've got localization, we've got X11 services, we have audio services, we have user accounts, we have programs, we have everything. This file is really monolithic in many ways, in a good way. We even have a hardware configuration file, which we're not even going to talk about that much today, but yeah, we've got everything as far as modularity and reproducibility and extensibility, etc. So yeah, you can think of this as sort of an Arch install, but in one file. So let's get started on the install by editing what we need to on the file. For our situation, our system dboot is already set up correctly, so we can move on from that. Let's select our host name here by uncommenting this line, and I'm going to change this to NixOS BTW because I'm using NixOS, by the way. And if you're using Wi-Fi, you're going to want to uncomment this to enable WPA supplicant, and we're going to uncomment network manager so we can automatically have network on boot, and we are going to set our time zone by uncommenting this. And for my situation, I'm going to change this from Europe to America, and I'll change Amsterdam to Los Angeles. We don't need to configure a proxy here, and we actually don't need to do anything with the locale because we're on the default, which is NUS UTF-8, but if you are on a different locale, you're going to want to uncomment this line here, and you would change NUS.UTF-8 to whatever it is that your locale is. But for us, we're just going to leave that commented since, again, this is the default setting. Alright, now we see this X11 windowing system. Since we're going to be changing multiple options in Xserver, we can just make one set for Xserver by typing services.xserver equals curly brace. Let's close that out. And in here, we can just define all of our Xserver attributes. So first thing we're going to do is set enable equals true, and we have to add a semicolon. Today we're going to be using Qtile as a window manager, mainly because it is one of the best looking window managers out of the box, and it's pretty easy to modify. The config file is written in Python, so let's jump into that by typing window manager with a capital M .qtile.enable equals true. Semicolon there. Installing Qtile is very simple with NixOS. It's literally just one line here. Once this is enabled, NixOS knows, hey, let's install Qtile and let's point our display manager to Qtile. And make sure there's a semicolon at the end of this. Otherwise, it's going to be a syntax error. Alright, let's keep going down here. We can ignore the key maps because we are on a US keyboard, but this is one you do want to change if you're not in the US. And the default sound is perfect for us, so we'll keep that as pulse audio. And here we go. This is really the most important part of this file. These are the user options. So let's go ahead and uncomment this entire set. I'm going to enter visual block mode with Control V and just highlight all these spaces and hit X to delete them all. So now the set's uncommented. And yeah, we're going to change Alice to Tony because that's my name. So for you, just change it to whatever your username is going to be. And all of these defaults are perfectly fine for me. So we have normal user, we've got the wheel group for pseudo privileges, and yeah, the packages, it's giving me tree, which is kind of cool. You can define your own user level packages here, and your system level packages will be defined below. We do want to use Firefox today, so let's just uncomment this, programs.firefox.enables. And here we are, the meat and potatoes of your system packages. Let's uncomment this the same way we did the users set by hitting Control V to get into visual block mode and just deleting those spaces. Alright, so this is where you're going to install your environment packages. So if you're coming over from Ubuntu or Arch, instead of typing sudo apt install or sudo pacman-s, whatever the package name is, you can just specify them in this list, and NixOS will automatically install them whenever you rebuild it. And in order to find packages, you can just head over to search.nixos.org/packages, and we can search for something like NeoVim, and there you go. It'll list the name of the package, and this is the syntax you need for that packages list. So let's put NeoVim in there. And we're gonna put Alacritty. That's gonna be our terminal emulator today. And that's really all you need right now to get things going. So we can just quit out of this file with WQ. We're finally ready to install NixOS by typing NixOS-install. And that could take a minute, so I will see you shortly. Alright, we're prompted for that root password, and we're gonna do 123 today. Alright, NixOS is officially installed. And the last step we need to do before rebooting is give our user a password. We're going to do that with this command here. So we'll type nixos-enter-root/mnt-c password Tony. And we set that password up. NixOS is installed, so we're ready to reboot. Yeah, and we can just hit enter on NixOS, and there we go. And look at that beautiful light DM. Immediately set up. We're locked in. Let's go ahead and log in with our password that we just created. There we go. Qtile immediately launched. Beautiful minimal NixOS install, and we're ready to jump in and config this. As I said earlier, the beauty of NixOS in general is that we can declare what packages we want to install in our config file. This means that if and when we decide to use this exact setup on a different machine, we can just plug and play this config file into it, and we're good to go. Another benefit of this is that if our system breaks after installing a package or updating it, we can just roll back to the previous build and we're also good to go. So to install a program in NixOS, we just have to add it to that block in the packages section of our config file. So let's do that here. The default bind to open a terminal in Qtile is super enter, and we see Alacritty launches, so that's perfect. And let's jump into sudo for this by typing su. And let's do vim etc nixos config.nix. There's that file, just like we did before. And we're going to go down to the system packages list here, and let's add a program to this list just to show you how to install programs on NixOS. And we're going to add Btop. And if you are someone who is allergic to Vim or allergic to Emacs, etc., you can install gedit here, and you can use that for the remainder of the video for editing text. So yeah, we've added those two packages. Let's just write and quit that file. And to actually implement those, and you're going to be running this command a lot, we're going to type nixos-rebuild switch. And there we go. So now we have access to Btop, which is a nice little program we can use to see our system metrics here. And yeah, look at this, 800 megabytes of RAM. Beautiful minimal setup here. You know, we can get below that if we're using something like OpenRC or what have you, but this is pretty impressive for a NixOS install with systemd. All right, we can quit that with Q, move on to the next step. And once again, I mentioned this before, but if you're somebody who is not a huge fan of these terminal text editors, we installed gedit, so to edit that file, and every time I type vim nixos configuration, instead just do gedit etc nixos configuration.nix, and you can just open that file and get it. Now you have your access to your mouse, you can highlight stuff, copy and paste and what have you, so that's an option for you. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is install a wallpaper and show you how to set that up. So let's close the terminal with super W, which is the default binding in Qtile. And let's open up a run prompt with super R and type Firefox and hit enter. And there we go, the much loved corporate art, and the bloat continues. Let's go ahead and search Grubbox wallpapers. It's going to be that first link here. Let's do IRL today, and let's go with this castle. Looks pretty cool. So we'll right click that and save that. Let's make a new folder called walls, and we'll save that as castle.jpg, and there we go. And close Firefox with super W. Let's set that up. A really good extra resource for NixOS documentation and package syntax is mynixos.com, and we're going to use that right now to search for something called session commands. And here we see display manager session commands. And we're going to use this to set up our wallpaper. Let's open a terminal here with super enter. And let's switch into root here by typing su. And let's jump back into that config file by typing vim etc nixos config.nix. We can just search for packages, and here we are. So first thing we need to do is add X wallpaper to our packages list, and that's going to be the program we use to actually set the wallpaper. And then we actually need to enable it with that session commands option in X server. So in this set we can add display manager dot session commands equals, and we're going to add two single quotes here. We're going to add two commands here. One is going to be to set the wallpaper, so that'll be X wallpaper --zoom, and the path is going to be tilde/walls/castle.jpg, because that's where we save that file. We're going to add one more command here, and that's going to be xset_r rate 235 and this is optional, but for me I like this because this sets the keyboard repeat rate to 200 milliseconds for the delay before repeating a key, and it will repeat the key at 35 repetitions per second. And like I said, for me this is really noticeable when navigating files or holding backspace. You can feel free to tinker with these numbers, or you can just omit this. So let's close that string out with 2 more single quotes and a semicolon, and that looks good to go. Save and quit that file. And let's apply those changes by typing NixOS rebuild switch. Alright, that's awesome. Can clear that. Let's reboot one more time here, guys. Typing reboot. And as we see here at that systemd boot screen, we're seeing 3 different builds here, which is exactly like I said earlier. If you want to roll back to a different build, you can just go down to the second build or the first build and launch into it. But since our new build is most likely stable, let's launch into it. And there we go, light DM. Let's log in. And there we go, there's that wallpaper. Beautiful. And to demonstrate that xset command, I'll just go ahead and open any file here. And yeah, I'm seeing a big difference already. Feels a lot more comfortable. Alright, let's move on to the next step. Next thing I'm going to do is enable transparency in our Alacritty terminal emulator. And in order to do that, I need to edit the config file there. Please note there is a much more extensible alternative to this manual approach called Home Manager, which I won't be covering in this video, but I will be making a part 2 to this video where I do go over Home Manager and Flakes. So go ahead and subscribe if you want to see that. Alright, let's open a terminal, super enter. And I'm going to open Firefox on our second tag by hitting super 2, super R, type in Firefox. I'm going to go to alacritty.org and click configuration, and here is the syntax for our Alacritty toml file. So it says here we need to add a window section and set the opacity here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first make that file by typing mkdir.config/alacritty, and let's make that file by typing vim.config alacritty.toml. We'll add that window section and type opacity equals 0.9. So not too strong. Save and quit that file. And we're not going to be able to see that yet because we need to install a compositor. So let's do that in our Nix config. Let's go into sudo here with su. And we can open our NixOS configuration file here. Let's go down to the services section here and let's add a service for PyCom. So it's going to be services.pycom equals curly brace. And we're going to enable that by typing enable equals true. We're going to add backend equals glx. And that's standard for PyCom here. And let's add fade. Fade equals true. Close that and add a semicolon. Save and quit that file. Clear that. NixOS rebuild switch. Alright. Let's reboot one more time here, guys. Typing reboot. And there we see generation 4. That's our 4th build, and that is our PyCom installation. Let's load that up. Alright, let's log back in. And there we go. You saw that fade. You can open a terminal here. And there we go. We see that transparency. Awesome. Let's move on to the next step. Let's install a font using the fonts.packages syntax in our NixOS config file. And this is the NixOS wiki here, guys. So we will go back into root here. We'll open this config file here with Vim, and we'll put it right here after the system packages. That's going to be fonts.packages. It's going to be with pkgs, and that's going to be a left bracket. JetBrains Mono is the name of our font. Close that out with a right bracket and a semicolon. Save and quit that file. And let's run NixOS rebuild switch again. And there we go. Let's go back into Tony. Let's enable that font in our Alacritty config by typing vim.config alacritty.toml. And that'll be in a font section, and that's going to be normal equals curly brace family equals JetBrains Mono with a capital B, and the style is going to be regular. It looks good to go. And just so you know, I didn't memorize this. I'm just looking at the documentation from Alacritty's website here, so I encourage you to check that out. A link for this will be right below the subscribe button. Alright, let's save that. And there we go, beautiful. We see that JetBrains Mono font right in our terminal. Can move on to the next step. This system is already semi-usable. Honestly, a lot more usable for me than a out-of-the-box desktop environment, but we are going to need a few basic programs that are usually included in one of those desktop environments. So let's grab some stuff here. Go back into root by typing su, and let's vim that configuration file again. Go down to this package list here, we're gonna add a couple programs here. We're gonna get PC Man FM, which is a very, very minimal file manager, and we're gonna get Rofi here. But for you guys here, I encourage you to pause the video and check out this wiki and really search for the programs that you guys like to use. So if you're somebody who likes VS Code, maybe you'd search VS Code here, and then there it is. You see it's just called VS Code. Let's say you're somebody who likes Steam. You can get Steam right here. And let's say you need an NVIDIA driver. You type NVIDIA. You got all the information you need on that. And this package manager is built different. You can use it on any operating system. It has way more packages than any other repository, including the AUR, which really is part of the reason why I keep calling it the endgame of Linux, even though it's not really the endgame of Linux because that would be Linux from scratch, but this is close to that endgame and very, very good for somebody who likes really tweaking their system. But for us, I think that's gonna do it for us. We'll go ahead and save, quit that file, run NixOS, rebuild switch again. Beautiful. Let's go back into Tony. And let's see if that worked. Let's type Rofi show drun. There's Rofi. We can use Rofi right here to set a theme in Rofi. Let's go with Arc Dark. Do Alt A to save that. All right. So one of the last things we need to do is set those keybinds. We normally start with that, but there's so much to do in NixOS that kind of got ahead of ourselves. So let's edit our Qtile config by typing vim.config Qtile config.py. Now this is a Python file, so don't be scared if you're allergic to Python. Not a huge deal. We can work through it together here. For me, I'm gonna just jump right to the bottom of this keys list, and I'm gonna add a key here for Firefox. It's gonna be key parentheses bracket mod, just like the other ones. And I'm gonna set that to B for browser. That's gonna be lazy.spawn Firefox. All right, so we can duplicate these and add a couple more here. Let's change this to F for a file manager, and we'll change that to PC Man FM. And for this one, we're gonna do Rofi show drun, and we'll change that to D, so it's super D. And one more thing I'm gonna do here is I'm used to this being Q instead of W to kill the window. So I'll change that to Q. And while we're in this file, let's get rid of this junk on the bottom right. I really don't need to see any of that stuff. And we see that's down here, so we can get rid of these two lines. We don't need this default config or that indicator on how to spawn programs. And we don't need this quick exit button. I think that should be good to go. And last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna head over to the font section and change that to JetBrains Mono. And we can restart Qtile while our session's active by hitting Super Control R. And there you go. Got rid of those unnecessary trays. Should be able to quit this with Super Q. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, we can test those keybinds. We got Firefox, Super B, awesome. Got our file manager, Super F, awesome, cool. This is a usable system. Since we're not using Home Manager today, and that is going to be explained in part 2. If you wanted to just have this as your system, but you wanted your config files, one way you can version control those config files would be to do something like make a directory called NixOS.files. And in that directory, you can copy your entire Alacritty folder to it, as well as your Qtile directory. And the command for that is just going to be cp-r path to original and then path to location. Just hit enter for that. And to version control those config files, we need to install Git. So let's jump back into that config file one more time. We'll go down to system packages and we'll add Git, and we'll also add pfetch because we do need to end the video at some point. And this time let's add a -- upgrade to the NixOS rebuild switch command, and that's going to be for those of you who are coming over from Arch, the SYU command, or from Ubuntu, maybe that's Linux Mint. That's going to be that sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade command. Just pass that into NixOS rebuild switch, and it will upgrade all your packages. And this might take a while, so I will see you in a minute. All right, that's good to go. Let's go back into Tony. We'll go over to that NixOS.files. Let's type tree to kind of show what that looks like. All right, cool. So we could do a git init on this entire repo. And then you'd head over to a Git managing website, maybe GitLab or GitHub, and create the repo. I've gone ahead and created a NixOS.files repo here, and I will post that in the description. So we can get the URL for that here. Let's go back to our terminal, clear that. We'll do git remote add Tony, and then we'll paste that URL. We'll do git status here to see what we've got changed. We can do git add dot to just add everything. And we'll do git commit -am quote, I use NixOS, by the way. We'll do git push Tony master. And yeah, there we go. and clear that. So then if you were to install NixOS on a different machine without Home Manager, you would just do a git clone and then the name of the repo, and then you'd specify a directory here. Our directory nixos.files already exists, so just to demonstrate this, I'll do nixos dots, and that worked. And then you would just symlink those config files to your .config directory. So we could do that by doing ln-sf nixos dots Alacritty, and then that's going to be symlinked to .config Alacritty. We'll do the same thing for Qtile. And we can do ls-la.config. And here we see the Alacritty is symlinked to those dot files we just pulled from GitHub, and the Qtile directory is pulled from those dot files as well. So this is a old-fashioned way of managing your dot files, and that's great, but we're going to get into a different way using Home Manager in part 2. Alright, that's going to wrap it up for today. We'll address Home Manager and Flakes on a part 2, or maybe even a part 3. But yeah, thanks so much for checking out this video, and if there's anything Linux related you would like to see in the future, let me know in the comments. And now it's finally time for me to end the video with an obligatory pfetch.